Hello, everybody. How are you? Welcome to this session of Book Talk. We are here. We want to talk about the Apocalypse Game by author D.C. Smith. So we just want to understand what is the Apocalypse Game, what was the inspiration behind it, and why was D.C. Smith, pushed to write it, and what are the lessons that he learned along the way. So that is what we're going to be discussing today. So we're just going to welcome DC Smith, and then he's going to walk us through some of those things that we want to get to know today. Hello, DC Smith.
Hello, Josephine. Thank you for being on.
How are you? Karibu, welcome.
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good, fantastic. So maybe just tell us about yourself a little bit. Tell us where you're located. Anything you can tell us about yourself.
I'm in the United States in North Carolina, and I like to say that I'm at where the road ends at the sea, a little fishing village called Morehead City in North Carolina, and we have a view of the ocean right outside the window here. It's wonderful. It's a calm place to write, which is why I came here.
Oh wow, fantastic! That's good to know. So maybe you can just tell us what was the inspiration behind the Apocalypse Game. But maybe before we even discuss that, maybe you can tell us what the Apocalypse Game is about. You can give us a brief summary of what the book is about.
Well, it's a book about how sometimes the worst of human nature and modern value systems and unbridled science might play into the beginnings of the biblical apocalypse. And it's a thriller. It's kind of a dark and gritty thriller with moments that are uplifting and even funny, but it's a story that'll grab your heart and drag you forward right to the end.
Okay. And what was the inspiration behind it?
My whole adult life, which has been a while, I've been interested in how science and human nature and government systems and economies might play into an apocalypse. As opposed to many of the traditional apocalyptic books are more around viruses and zombies and also plagues and all sorts of things. How might the world as we know it play into the start of the biblical plagues and the beasts? Okay. So this story starts out in New York City just a couple of years from now with a young man who's terribly handicapped, terribly crippled at birth, but the most brilliant human ever as a result of some experimentation by the government. And he really has a terribly hard life with foster parents, but he's determined to rise above it, to cure his body and get the girl. Mm-hmm. And ultimately that leads to the start of the biblical apocalypse.
Okay, fantastic. So the main character, is it, what will you call him? Is it, I've read a brief. So it's Jonas. So maybe you can tell us, Jonas, is he inspired by a real life character? Is he, or?
I suppose they're all inspired by people I've known, or maybe my own life in ways, But Jonas Gradus is his name, and he is in a motorized wheelchair in Harlem. And he's a mixed race young man who's really had a hard time, but he's just incredibly brilliant, an atheist. So the protagonist is an atheist, and he has being brilliant, he has his logic and his reasoning for all of that. And a part of what we get to experience is how the world and other forces for the good influence him or try to influence him, as dark forces try to influence him another way.
Okay.
It's so what the God and the devil in the final time, the tribulation time.
Okay. What has really stood out to you as you were writing this book? Is there something that maybe you didn't know before that somehow hit you hadn't realized yet? Is there something that you can say really stood out or that you learned in the process of researching the book and even writing it?
Oh, that's a really good question. And the answer is yes. What surprises me, my wife, we go for these long beach walks where I bounce ideas off of her. And it's what surprises me, the book's evolution is, in the big picture, it's as I envisioned it. But in the scenes and the evolution of the scenes and the characters, that always surprises me what the characters do. Mm-hmm. Because they have their personality, they have their background, they have their agendas. And in the end, it surprises me what comes out of their mouth, where that leads them. And that's been a really fun journey.
Okay, maybe you can give us an example of Jonas, for instance. What stood out? when it comes
Sure.
to Jonas, for instance? Uh-huh.
Oh, when I first wrote, Jonas is he is he's had abusive foster. He's raised by foster parents in Harlem, and he's been abused by them. He's been mocked by other kids because he's so terribly crippled in his wheelchair. His left side doesn't function. His left side is withered, so only his right side works. And he has to wear Depends because he has urinary problems. So he just had a really tough life. And when I first wrote this, I think I've written this book 15 times over the last 7 years. It's evolved a lot along with my writing. And it surprised me. At first, he was quite bitter. And in the end, I just realized his whole personality and his character, he's actually an optimist. And you'll love him. I would challenge the reader, even though he's an anti-hero. He has no
Mhm.
heroic you could identify at the beginning. You will love him and you'll
Okay.
empathize with him, even as he has to make some dark choices ultimately.
Mhm.
He's haunted by a demon. So yeah, as he grows up, it's a voice that talks to him in the dark. He thinks it might be a subconscious, an alternate personality that tells him dark things about the world and tries to influence him towards a dark path. While this girl he loves might be the last living saint, even though she's flawed, and for sure she's flawed, but she's totally unattainable for him. She's a piano prodigy in Manhattan, and he is just completely focused on her. And so it's that tension between her possibly being the last living saint. She's definitely a good person, and this demon trying to push him on a dark path.
Okay. So, how many characters are we frequently interacting with in the book? There's Jonas and how many other people?
I think it's probably 8 main characters.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's Jonas. The 80% of the book is first person present tense. You are in Jonas's head, which is really fun. The various readers, test readers, and we just got a 4-star review this week, 4 out of 4 stars from Online Book Club. And everybody talks about it's a struggle. He's on a dark arc. He's an anti-hero on a dark arc, and yet you can't not back him, despite that he does things that would otherwise be abhorrent to you, and because his circumstance is so unique. But so he's 80% of the book. You're in his head, and he's funny and pithy and clever. Sometimes incredibly dark. His whole growing up, he loves fantasy stories, and he loves the monsters in the fantasy stories because they're never weak, they're never abused. Like in Beauty and the Beast is one of his favorite stories, but he says the beast should have eaten those villagers for being so cruel to him because he's been so abused. He has that outlook on life, and so
Okay.
ultimately he has fantasies about making beasts. He's exploring advanced genomic technology so he can cure his body and become a normal or maybe even a handsome man and get the girl. But this advanced genomic science he's pursuing with the help of an artificial intelligent friend. Kind of think of an Alexa or a Siri today, but 10 years from now and more advanced. And he comes up with a tweak to change his artificial intelligent friend. Her name is Hella. It's a her to him. And Hella, he changes her and she becomes vast, global and vast, and
Hmm.
sane, and anxious to please her creator. And he has a lot of dark, vengeful fantasies when the powerful come after him, and they do. And so she starts to implement his fantasies, his darkest fantasies, and that's really what possibly sparks the biblical apocalypse from a perspective of the beasts and plagues.
Okay. Is there at the end of the book, does the reader have to imagine what happens next, or do you reveal it all, or is there do you leave us, some kind of suspense?
Oh, I leave a lot of suspense because book two is available. I'll bring launch book two at the end of summer. It's already written as well. So I spent these 7 years writing. I've written the first 4 books. So I'm in this kind of final process of massaging each book and getting it just perfect. Every word. This book is 87,000 words, and I found that every darn word has to be just right. You know,
Yes, that's the burden of being a writer. Hmm.
it doesn't end. Every word has to be just the right word. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And so maybe you can let us know who are you targeting? Who is the target audience for this book? Who do you want to read the book?
Oh, that's a good question. I read I used to tell elements of the story. I have 5 children, and mostly grown. And I used to tell elements of the story to them as they were growing up. It was a kind of a nightly ritual. But the story's evolved a lot. And ultimately, 10 years ago, I read this Pew poll. Pew in the United States, there's a polling organization, one of the biggest, that does polls on all sorts of topics, politics and whatever else. They did one on the apocalypse, and it showed that 41% of Americans believe the apocalypse has already started or soon will. And there were similar numbers in the entire Western world. And in the Muslim world, for example, even higher numbers. So I thought, well, I've always kind of wondered about that myself. Sometimes, doesn't the world seem a little crazy these days? Is it in fact a train heading for a cliff?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, that's the story I want to tell. Is how does today's science evolve, and how do the way our value systems are evolving today, and the value systems that Jonas embraces, a modern young man in New York City. How does all that play into possibly the start of the biblical apocalypse? I mean, it's kind of the topic was I never thought that God would if you believe in the biblical apocalypse, that he would launch all these plagues and beasts themselves. Probably he would just allow humanity to do it, like the COVID virus, for example. Allow humanity to go and make some virus that never existed, and then suffer the consequences of it. So in this book series, from a science perspective, it's artificial intelligence and synthetic biology. We have in the world today, we have pigs that have never existed before that have human genes, and they've done that to, so that we can transplant hearts from pigs into humans. For example, they've made the organs in a pig resemble human organs. But you have to think about that. What does that mean? Because pigs are always known to be very intelligent, and now they have brains that are more human. What is the pig experiencing as we do this in Europe and the United States and China? And we've built bacteria from scratch, where we've actually made the genome, stitched atoms together and made the DNA and made living bacteria that are now evolving and procreating. What if it got out of the labs? What would that bacteria do in the world? It's a COVID type of question. What would happen next? So this story is a lot about, well, what happens when artificial intelligence becomes vast and powerful, and what happens when we start creating creatures that never existed before, life forms that never existed, and where could that take the world? That's what Jonas is key to enabling and making happen, as he tries to fix the body. He just wants to fix his body. He wants safety in life, and he wants love, like most of us. That's all he wants.
All right. So what kind of research have you had to do? What kind of people have you had to talk to? What kind of websites have you had to visit? What kinds of books have you had to read for you to put your book together?
Oh, vast. I think I'd mentioned I've been a fan of this subject my whole adult life. So call that 40 years, just for round numbers. But I'm an electrical engineer and a physicist. So by training, I'm a scientist, and I have graduate degrees in economics, and I run companies. So I left the industry in a role running a company up in Washington, D.C. in 2015 to come write this story full time. So I'm very conversant with these topics of science, and where science is today and how it might evolve, as well as I have a lot of opinions about where the world is, as well as we all do, I think, today. So it's really combining all those sources, 40 years of constant reading and study into this story. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a vast story. It's far-reaching.
Okay. And you've mentioned there are about 4 books in this series. Maybe
Yeah,
is that
first 4. I'm just massaging book 2, which will come out at the end of the summer. It's called The King of Manhattan, and that will be number 2. Number 3 will probably be the end of the year, and that's the Battle for New England. And then
but
book
do they
4.
all borrow?
What's that?
Sorry. Sorry.
Oh,
The fourth
and
one.
then the next year, which
Okay.
it's called the Hellion Wars.
All right.
It's
And they
spreading.
all borrow. Do they all borrow from the Apocalypse game, or are they all separate?
No, the
On their
Apocalypse
own.
game. They're all the
Okay.
Apocalypse. Book 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this
Okay.
is
So maybe.
if you happen to know what the big outside of the Bible in the Western world at least, what the biggest selling book series of all time is. Are you aware of that?
What the biggest?
The biggest selling book series of all time.
The biggest selling book series of all time.
Yes.
Oh wow, I don't know. I'd say the Bible is the biggest, is a one of the best selling books in the world, but series I don't know.
Well,
Series I
you're
don't
right.
know.
But the biggest fiction book series in the whole world is called the Left Behind series, and it was
Mm-hmm.
written here in the States. And the last book came out about 10 years ago, and it's a series that sold 80 million books. And what it talks, it speaks to an audience that wants to know about, well, what might the Christian apocalypse version look like? And so that's the same audience this book series is, but from a completely different approach. Really focused on how does instead of kind of putting it all on God to cause all these troubles in the world, how does mankind and our own worst tendencies and unbridled science play into that?
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
And
Just
how long?
go
Sorry.
ahead. Oh, I look around me today at where we're, what we're doing in science, for example, and it's almost and it's impossible to. I'm not a fan of government regulation, but on the other hand, you need some. And COVID is such a great example where the consensus seems to be it's a man-made virus that's now loose in the world and evolving. What happens as we do that with a lot of other things? Other sorts of life forms, whether bacteria or viral or even they've made puppies that glow in the dark.
Okay, that's news. I didn't know
And
that.
how do you manage that? And particularly when you have countries like China that do what they want to do, and there's no, they're not a part of a Western rule of law system. So it's it's not a very uplifting topic because of course countries are going to do what they're going to do, and these new life forms are going to be unleashed on the world. I mean, I predict that there sometime in the next 10 years we'll see an Olympics where suddenly some athlete, perhaps from some place like China, suddenly drops 20% off a sprint record, and they'll analyze his genes and find cheetah genes woven into their muscle fibers, right? We're going to start to see these things because the technology is there. It's going to be interesting. But I kind of look at well, how does that play into if we believe it's the end of an age, that mankind's turned their back on God, and so God might let the tribulation happen. How does all that play into that? That's really what the
Okay.
story of the Apocalypse game is about.
All right.
What could
And
come
you
next?
talk what could come next? Okay. Do you mention now that you mentioned China? I thought about TikTok. Do you talk about all these different platforms that are now available, social media platforms, and how they're playing into, the end?
I do actually,
Hmm.
yeah. And
Hmm.
in the book series, government is even bigger than it is today, more powerful, more in our lives. It used to be that and in the book series, government and social media are aligned, which is certainly something we're seeing in the United States today, and big government and big social media controlling the agenda. So that plays into the entire book series.
Okay.
The consequences of that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then maybe you've said you've been writing the book for how many years now? I just want to get a feel of how have you balanced your work schedule or your personal life with writing the book? What is the structure like? What was the schedule looking like for you as you were writing?
I started on the research for it and structuring it back in 2007, believe it or not. But I was also running companies and very busy, full time plus busy. So when I got the opportunity to leave industry and do this full time, which was 2015, I moved here to where the road ends at the sea, like I like to say, and I've worked on it full time, which to me is 6 days a week, 5 or 6 keyboard hours a day. And
Fantastic.
largely now it goes much faster, but at first, it's an art to writing well, and it's an art to writing fiction well, as you know. And so I have done, particularly of book one, I've done endless drafts as my writing improved. So I hope
Okay.
that early reviews are fantastic. I hope that remains the same.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to add concerning the book regarding yourself? Anything else? I think we're
Well,
coming to an end.
available on Amazon in paperback and hardback and ebook. And I promise it will not let you down. It will grab you and shake you and leave you. One of an author of a dozen books read it a couple months ago, and she wrote, and it's actually on the Amazon site, but she wrote, "This story will grab you by the guts, shake you, and leave you gasping for more." So
Okay,
it's so.
fantastic.
I used that, and she said you can use that. So
Okay, amazing. And by the way, now I remembered another thing I needed to ask you regarding surveillance, or how capitalism is playing into all of this, and how, let's say, we have companies like Google and Apple, how all these terms of conditions that readers don't usually read when they're clicking on all these different, when they're signing up to all these different platforms, is that something that you also talk about, how users privacy is at risk and how we are not seeing that?
absolutely, thank you for bringing that up. What it is, Jonas has been so abused. He is truly the underdog. Besides being so incredibly brilliant and a little bit acid from the in personality from some of the tough life he's had, he is just brilliant. And what he really wants to do is turn the world upside down. He wants to bring low the powerful and raise up the masses. And the wealth divide, the vast wealth divide that we have today, gets worse in this time frame, which is a few years from now. And this, COVID continues to circulate and causing more economic disruption. There are famines and wars in Europe and with China. So, what you could easily imagine a few years from now, a war over Taiwan and this war in Europe extending, and the famines they're beginning to talk about now. So, all that is in this book. And what Jonas wants to do is raise up the poor people suffering, the refugees at the bottom, and bring down the powerful. And because
Okay.
he feels so abused, he feels that every powerful person's an abuser, a predator,
Hmm.
and he wants to sort those people out. And his
Okay.
fantasies are pretty dark about how he sorts them out. So, and then you have Hella, his artificial intelligent friend, hearing those fantasies and reading his notes about how to bring the powerful down, and she starts to implement them.
Okay.
And so it's fascinating. But that is exactly what this economic capitalism and the huge wealth disparity. I mean, obviously, I'm a fan of capitalism overall, but having these enormous wealth disparities is destructive to the world, and that's Jonas's view in the book, and he has a plan to fix it. Yeah,
Okay.
he he, he
Jonas.
views he views humanity because he has always viewed he's been treated so badly. He views himself as an other because nobody treats him normally except this girl Sarah that he's interested in. Everybody else, their eyes kind of slide over him because he's so ugly and and
Mhm.
and warped in his wheelchair. So he's always viewed himself as an other amongst humanity. And he kind of views humanity as a biological system. And he says, well, the only way to get a real change in a biological system is to exert pressure over a period of time, and then the system will evolve. So he plans to evolve humanity to a better end in his mind.
Okay. All right. Jonas, the anti-hero. We look forward to interacting with Jonas. You said we can find the books at Amazon and where else?
Amazon and Ingram Spark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazon and Ingram's Park. All righty.
All
Thank you
right.
so much for being here with us, DC Smith. Thank you so much. And guys, go out and get the book and read it. It's bound to be very, very intriguing. And we hope to see you again next time. Thank
Yeah.
you so
All right.
much.
Thank you so much. Pleasure. Bye.